This video is how to do, excuse me, the hooded scarf that I had showed on my Facebook channel. If you are a member there, you saw the exclusive video talking about what my next video would be, which is this. This was made on the pink loom. This came in a 4-pack of the pink, the yellow, the green, and the blue, going from smallest to biggest. So if you have that pack, that'll be great because then you'll know which one I'm using. So this is the first prototype of it. This was using one strand of red heart yarn just to see if it would work out. So then I took that idea and I decided to make it bigger. So this is the adult size. Again, there's pictures of this on my Facebook channel if you haven't seen them already. So this is the adult size. Now there's a couple things I'm going to mention. One, I used 2 strands. 2, the hat and the scarves were done pretty much on the same loom. So you can really not see any indication of any kind of stitch work when I had to attach the other one, and that's because of what we do. The hardest part of this is going to be making the hat. It may look simple enough, but the way I do it, I'm not sure how other people would do it, but this is the way I do it. Now, if you will notice, there are some gaps, which are fine, because this is 2 strands. If you had a thicker yarn even, then you probably wouldn't see them as much, or you can just kind of sew them closed or add a ribbon in through there. It's whatever you want to do. I don't mind them being on there as a little extra detail to the hat. So, what I'm going to do, because this is going to be kind of a long process for the hat, I'm going to show you how to do the hat part on the small loom. 1, it stays in view better, and 2, it's just easier to use. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over and talk to you more about the other one, how we actually do the scarf part on it, and I will reference the green loom for that. So do the hat, we're going to use the pink one, but the same process we do on here, we're going to do, excuse me, if I can get it out, on this green one. This green one worked out to make me a hat. That was pretty good adult size for me. And probably if you do the yellow one that came in this pack, it would probably be a good size for a child. And the blue one, I'm not sure, probably would be good if somebody has a really big head. So I'm going to show you the hat on this first. And then the process for doing the scarf is actually the easiest part. And then I'll switch over and I'll tell you about how much I increased and decreased when we come to that part. So for now, this is the focus on the hat. Now, I also have to point out that when I started this hat scarf project, I had 2 skeins of Super Saver Red Heart yarn. The green one, the same size, with 364 yards of size 4, the medium yarn. This was spring green and this was just a white. I had to use these because these are the only ones I had full skeins of versus all the colors, and I didn't know how much I was going to use. So I started out with them being this size. By the time I got done with my hat, I just want to show you visually, I've got this much left of each color. So you're definitely going to need almost a full skein. If you're using 2 strands of Red Heart, you will need 2 skeins in either the same color or alternating colors, whatever you choose, and you'll probably be left with about this much, which is still good to use on a different project. So you also need, at the end, your crochet hook, your normal tool, pair of scissors, a counter for when we get to the part of the scarf. This is my new counter. I'll just quickly talk about it for a minute. This is my new counter. It's actually more related for sports, so that you can kind of rest it on your finger and then just click it as you need to, and it tells you the number's pretty big, and then you turn it all the way back to 0. Pretty easy. I like it because it's a little bigger than the red one I was using, and it is something I can lay on my finger if I'm working, or if I have beside me, it's got bigger numbers than what I've seen the other. And this was actually on Amazon. I don't remember the exact brand of it, but it was like between $5 and $6, which was actually cheaper than some of the ones designed for knitting. So don't hesitate to think outside the box for things knitting related. Like I said, this was more under the sports category as a counter versus a loom knitting counter. And granted, it's going to go up pretty high in numbers, but I thought this would also be a great tool if you have the DA Infinity 2 loom, which is a really big loom, which you're going to do a blanket on, which is going to have a lot of rows. This would be a great tool because you know that you might hit pretty high up for rows. I would hate to actually count them because counting the rows on this was surprising. Okay, so we're going to work on the hat part first, and then we'll switch over to how I did some decreasing for the scarf. Again, that's going to be up to you. So, excuse me, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have our pink loom. And we're going to cast it on with whatever colors you choose to do. And again, this is the same process. I'm going to use up some of this green, just to kind of keep it the same color I had. So, what we're going to do, you're going to cast on your 2 strands. If you're using 2, if you have a super bulky, then you could try that. It may change out the length for your scarf, which you can modify anyway. The hat part is going to be the same no matter what. So do your normal slip knot. And what we're going to be doing is when we look at the loom, whether it be the small one or the bigger one, you're going to work it as a U. So if I talk about the U, I'm talking about if you ignored this peg, that you would have a U, that it would go around. And this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be working the U, basically. So you're going to place it on one peg. It's up to you whether you want to hide the strand or not. You could leave it dangling so you know where you started, or you could hide it. But for the sake of this video, if you want to hide it, just grab all of them and wrap it around. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to drop it down so that we'll know where we started, just in case you're curious. Now the other thing you're going to do is you're going to wrap the pegs just like you normally would, but just in a U formation. So that's all I'm doing, is I'm wrapping the pegs. Now I just did the simple E-wrap method throughout the whole thing and knitting over. You could change it up to do some purling if you wanted. If you try to do a tighter stitch than that, I can't guarantee how the rows would be exactly, because I use the E-wrap method for it. So I don't know how your rows would change and how the look of it would change if you do a tighter stitch or a chunky stitch. So there we go. We already wrapped, so we got our U, again, ignoring this one, and we're going to work our way back to the other side. We're going to do this for 5 rows. So we're going to work back, and again, when you work back, this one doesn't need it. You're going to go right to the one next to it to wrap it. Oops, and make sure you got both strands if you're using 2 strands, and work your way back excuse me, to the other side, keeping an eye on making sure your yarn's coming out easy enough for you. That's all you're going to do. And what's good is you can hold it like this and you can pretty much kind of just keep track and making sure that both strands follow you around. A couple times I noticed I missed one and I had to go back and make sure both strands. And then you just kind of turn it as you're working your way back up. So I'm working it back up to the start of the U, and then I'm going to knit over. So what I usually do is I like to knit over where I last wrapped, because that kind of secures it in place. Then I don't have to hang on to it as much, and then I can go back to where I started in the beginning and knit them all over. So I'm going to go back and I'm just going to knit them over, taking the bottom 2 strands over the top. And like I said, the hat part is going to be probably the most tedious in a way, because you really have to pay attention to what I'm going to be doing once I hit the 5 rows on this. So we're just knitting them over, nothing really special. Like I said, if you wanted to try purling them, you could. I just kept it as simple as I could, just simple E-wrap. It's a little faster than purling. So we're just going to do, I did, like I said, 5 rows back and forth on the green loom. Okay, so we did 1 row. Now this is where if you had your clicker, once you got under that row, you grab your clicker and you push it down so they know you did 1. That's just because sometimes I'll forget where I am. If you're like me and you have kids or you have people running in and out of your house or something, it's easy to forget where you left off. So definitely keep track. Even as simple as 5 rows, still keep track of it, because otherwise they'll mess you up. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that you've already gone back and forth 5 times. I want to kind of keep this video as kind of short as I can, because it is a long process to do this hat. So we're going to pretend that you've already gone back the 5 times. You can do more, you can do less. I just chose 5. And what will happen is it will create this natural rolling in it. If you don't want that, then yeah, probably the garter, but I didn't mind the actual kind of rolling of it. It did that on its own with the way we did it, which I thought was kind of a cute little added touch. You might be able to block it. I've never done blocking, so please don't ask me how exactly. You can block it and it would straighten it out. So once you get the 5 done, this is where it really becomes tricky a little bit, and that's why it's going to be good in a way for you to know you're starting if you have that. So you've already wrapped it 5 times, creating the U effect. Like I said, you're ignoring that. Now what we're going to do, which becomes a little trickier, excuse me, is we're going to work the yarn to the second peg over here. Because what you want to do is you're almost what I call decreasing it down to a smaller U, and then we will increase it to a bigger U, if that makes any sense. Sounds tricky and weird, but that's kind of what helps create Like this was going one way, like up the loom or whatever, and this was going down. If you really notice, you can see that my knitting goes one way and then goes a different way. And that's just, which is kind of cool, which means you could change out color. So if we're going to do that, we're going to kind of wrap it. If you have a stitch marker, you may want to place it where you know you're going to stop, just so that that way, you know, definitely it's something that can be moved as you work your way down. I'm just pushing down the strands before we start. Now what we're going to do is we're going to wrap it to the other side. I mean, if you don't want to do that 5 rows, you can go right into doing this too. It's basically, a lot of it is kind of figure out how you want the hat to be, and then you can modify things pretty easily. So when we come back up, what we're going to do is we're only going to go, you can see that I'm going to stop at the second peg down. Okay, that's where I'm going to stop. And what I'm going to do, like I did before, is I'm going to knit it over. Okay, so that it will lock into place and be stubborn. Okay, I'm losing my yarn here, so that's the other reason I like locking it in place when I can. So I've wrapped it. I'm going to lock it into place by knitting it over. Okay, and then you knit that over. Now you're going to keep track that that's where you ended. And you're going to knit all these over. I mean, it's a pretty simple process, just keeping track of what you do, basically. So that's all I'm doing, is I'm knitting these over. Be sure to grab both strands. There were times I missed a strand, and that can get kind of annoying. So if you are using 2 strands, really double check that you're grabbing both of them when you go to knit over. And this will be a little awkward and time consuming on the longer loom as well. So this is definitely a project that will take you maybe 2 or 3 days or so to complete, just depending on your schedule, depending on if you have any interruptions and that. But like I said, keep track of, if you have a stitch marker, that will definitely come in handy for if you ever have to leave the project. Okay, so we're working our way back to the other. I'm sorry for going out of camera, but I'm just knitting them over until I get back to the front. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to wrap back to that same peg that we ended on. And what that means, I'm going to push all these down so they're out of your way when you go to wrap back the other way. Okay, so we stopped here when we went around. So we're going to go right parallel to it. When we go back wrapping it, we're going to stop at the second peg on the other side. So you can kind of place your thumb there or a stitch marker there to let you know that you're going to be stopping on that peg, and you're going to work your way back. Okay, so we're working our way back to stop on that second peg. Okay, and now we're stopping on that peg. And we're going to knit over. Okay, and that's kind of the process we're going to do. I have to pause now. My battery's dying on this camera, so I'm going to have to switch over to doing this video on my webcam. I'm sorry, okay, so stay with me. Continuation of how to do the hooded hat that I did. And we're at the point where, like I was talking about, because I had to replace my battery, about how we're wrapping it, and we're kind of doing it like a U. So as you can see, I've got the pegs wrapped, and I'm keeping track of where I last wrapped. So I last wrapped this one. So when I go back through, I've wrapped up to that one, as you can see. So what I'm going to be doing is I've wrapped myself back to this, excuse me, peg, and I got stuff in my way here. So we're going to knit over all the ones that you see that need to be knitted over for the 2. Because we were working our way back to the other side. So it may be a little tough because I'm using 2 strands of yarn. I would recommend if you can find just a bulky yarn, you might be able to get away with just doing 1 strand, and it will make it a little less confusing, because right now with doing 2 strands, you got to make sure you grab both of them at the bottom. So that's all I'm doing, is knitting it over until I get back to the beginning. And this process is going to be able to be used on the other looms, the longer looms as well. So all we're doing is knitting them over till we get back to the beginning, because this is where we're going to be wrapping again. So we're just knitting these over. Now this is the process really that takes, it's not like it takes a lot of time, it's just a little more you have to be aware. The other parts after this aren't really that bad, and you should be able to whip through the other parts depending on how fast you knit. This is probably the most, not necessarily time consuming, but where you have to pay attention more. The other parts are just adding the scarves, and they're just simply working one side of the hat and then the other. So all I'm doing is I'm knitting them all over till I get back to where I started. Making sure that I get both strands, since I'm using 2 strands, up and over. Okay, so we're back to the beginning. So we had wrapped back to this peg. Now that means if you're looking at it as the U, first push down these so they're out of your way. So you have room to wrap. And then all you're going to do is you're going to realize that you had came back to this peg, which means when you wrap this way again, you're going to wrap to the 3rd peg on the other side. And I'm just doing a simple E-wrap. If you just choose to do a different stitch, that is up to you. So I'm just E-wrapping it till I get to the 3rd peg. If you have an easy to remove like stitch marker, it's easy just to kind of move it down as you go, because that way if you do have to put the project down, you'll remember where you left off. I did have to do that a couple times because of my daughter, where I would have to kind of keep track of where I did. And which means is you're only doing to this, excuse me, since you had wrapped to this one on the way back, we're wrapping to this one now. It's basically decreasing one. And then what I like to do is, since this is where I'm wrapping to, I like to knit that over because it locks it in place so that I can go back through and knit over the other ones and it won't fall off. So keep in mind that, so you're going to go back through and knit all these over that you just wrapped. And it's basically a back and forth idea. That's all you're going to do is work your way back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until you get to the point where you really can't do any more wrapping because you're down at the very end of the U. So I'm just knitting these over. And I'm sure there's other techniques, because like I said, what we're doing here is going to create the spot, and it's easier to show you in this hat, where you see the green running through. Now keep in mind this was done with 1 strand, so it's a lot bigger gap than on the one that I did this way with the double. So, but it's still a little bit of a gap where you can block it off by putting a piece of yarn through it, or you could even sew up the little gaps if they are something that bothers you. Now this sewed heart yarn, I'm not sure if I totally recommend it for this project. At least not for the scarf part. The scarf part is really rough, and it curled because of the way I did the stitches. I'll explain how you can fix that. But I didn't really care for this being the round my neck part. Like, I would have rather changed it to like a lion brand or something that was softer. But I was just practicing, so. Okay, so getting ourselves back to the beginning. And then this is where you basically keep in mind okay, so if you went to on the last couple here, so if you went to the 3rd peg, if you had started here and you went to the 3rd peg to end, you're going to work your way back till you get back to the 3rd peg over here. So that way that one gets wrapped. So push all these down. Okay, so you got them down to there. Now what you're going to do is you're going to wrap back to the 3rd peg on this side. Now I'm going to try to keep this video a little shorter, so I am going to cut steps a little bit. Basically, you're going to keep that pattern going until you get to where you can't really do that anymore. So I'm going to go off camera and I'm going to work my way back and forth, as you can just see how I did, going from one peg to the other, making sure that, excuse me, as you're wrapping, like I said, it ended on the 3rd peg over here, so it needs to come back and end on the 3rd peg over here. If that makes, any sense to you. Believe me, it was confusing for me the first time. So I'm going to the 3rd peg over here so that it matches the other wrap. Okay, so it's matching the other wrap. It's because we had ended on that side here, we want to end on this side here and knit over. And now because you're on the 3rd peg here, when you go, you're going to knit all those rows over and you're going to work your way back to the 4th peg over here and then come back to the 4th peg over here. So it's kind of like a pendulum type idea. You're swinging back and forth until basically that pendulum gets down to the bottom where you can't do it anymore. So I'm going to go off camera and work till we get to the end, and I'll show you about whether you should end on here. And then basically you're just going to swing that pendulum again, to bring it back up the loom. So I'm going to go off camera and I'm going to bring it down to where we need it to be to show you how to go back up the loom. I'm going back and forth and wrapping, and you can see that I'm down to the last little bit of what I call the pendulum, and this is how it's looking on the other side. So it's going to look almost like a triangle kind of coming out. So then what you're going to do is, like I said, I'm going to finish up this. I've already wrapped where I'm starting over here, excuse me, and I wrapped to that one. So I'm going to work my way back to wrap to this one. So I'm on the last few more wraps that I need to do to finish this up and then work my way back up the loom. So I'm knitting this over. Okay, and that was the last one I had wrapped where my finger is. So now what you're going to do is you're going to wrap to that peg. Excuse me. And you're going to knit over. Basically, like I said, you're working a pendulum, so you're working it back and forth to get to pretty much the last possible looping you can do over. Excuse me. Okay, and since we wrapped to that one, we're going to wrap back over to the adjacent one that's the same. Pushing them down if you need to. Now I had to cut and then retie my string, so you're going to see a couple strands that are kind of going to be in the way right now because I had to, excuse me, it's like, no, there we go. Because I had to adjust my wrapping because I had to cut, as you can see on the white, I had to cut it because there was a knot in it. So it's going to kind of mess with my wrapping on the way back through. And of course, always when you're on the tail end of something that it decides it wants to fight you. Okay, so like I said, I ended on this peg, so I'm going to the peg across from it over here and wrapping that and knitting over. I just lost the loop. Hang on a second. Okay, put that back on there because I lost the loop. Get back on there. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it again because I lost my loop when I went that time. And some of it is because of the extra strands. So I'm going to try to work the tails of when I tie it together to be out of my way a little bit so that they don't get caught up in what I'm going to do. You can always hide them later if you need to. Okay, so we're re-wrapped. We're knitting over. Okay, so now we knitted to this side over here. So now we're going to knit back when we get done knitting these over. Okay, now our goal is to go to this peg right there because we're going to go back and forth, as I said. So now you wrap back to that one. So pretty much, like I said, it's going to be to the last wire that you can't do it. So we're wrapping to this peg. We're knitting over, keeping your strands as much as you can out of your way. Try not to lose any loops if you can. I hate having to put loops back on a project or when a peg pops out on me like it just did. Okay, get back in there. That's some of the downside to loom knitting, when things don't quite go the way you want because things pop out or a loop comes off that you weren't thinking was going to come off. Okay, so alright. So now we're going to pendulum it back to this peg. And that's pretty much, I think, going to be as much as we're going to be able to wrap. Okay, so pretty much, okay, that peg. And now what you can do is you're going to turn around and re-wrap this last peg here, so you're ending on the point. So this last peg is what's wrapped because you went back and forth to kind of go downward. So that's as if it's all wrapped, working your way down the loom to close off the U, because this is the top part. This is actually, like I said, going to be the opening. That's this part right here. So what you see coming out of this part before we work our way back up is pretty much one side of this. As you can see with the green, it kind of blocks this side from this side. If you look close enough, you can see that the stitches are actually going a different way, because I'm not quite sure which one's which right now. Let me see, that's the top. So this is what we worked just now, is this triangle section. Now we're going to be working it back so we get this part done. And like I said, the green is a good way to show you which side I'm working on. And then all you're going to do when you're working your way back up, excuse me, is you're doing the pendulum in reverse until you get back to all these pegs being wrapped again. And that's going to help create more of a pocket back here. So this is what it should look like before you start going back up the loom. Excuse me. Okay, so now we want to do the pendulum back up. So we're going to go back and we're going to wrap this peg. So it's only one being wrapped right now. And then we're going to knit over. And then we're going to wrap to the other peg that's over here. And excuse the fingers that I'm pointing with. Okay, so wrap into that peg. Because basically our goal now is to get the pendulum back to being full. So now we've already wrapped to that peg, so now when we wrap, we're going to wrap to this peg. Okay, and then what that means, because we're wrapping to the second peg right there, we knit it over. Okay, and since we did to that second peg, we're going to go over until we hit the second peg on this side. Like I said, you're just mirroring your way back and forth so that each peg in this stand is getting wrapped in a sense to help block this off. I lost a loop. Okay. I'm trying to get a loop back on because I just lost a loop on this last peg. There we go. Like I said, not cooperating today. So like I said, we wrapped to this one, and we're knitting them over. I got one more knit over to do. Okay, and now we're going to wrap, as we wrap to this one, we're going to go and wrap to the third one. So you're basically working your way back up the pendulum until you get all of them wrapped again. And you'll kind of be able to tell where you left off, because if you look really closely, I can zoom in, you'll see, like on this side, that these are kind of joined, but there's no joining right here. So you'll be able to kind of gauge where you are by how they look in between the pegs. They'll kind of help be your guideline, because you'll be able to kind of see them linking from one to the other. So now, like I said, we're going to wrap till we get to that third peg up the side, like that, and we're going to knit over. Like I said, what you're seeing is kind of the joining of the pegs coming back together. So you'll be able to kind of tell, okay, we joined it here, now we need to make them join on this side. So you're going to go back over, keeping an eye on your yarn, and work your way back up. It's not as hard of a process as it sounds like, it's just a little more time consuming because you want to make sure that you're doing it pretty much in order. Like, I mean, when I did one before, I had messed up where I did it, so kind of keep an eye on that is what you're basically trying to do so that you don't overwrap a peg or underwrap a peg in a way. Okay, so now that we wrapped to that one, we're going to come up and we're going to wrap to this one. And that's all you're going to do until you work your way back up to the top of the loom. So go ahead and do that, the pendulum idea, until you get back to every peg being wrapped and you're back up to your starting point. And then I'll show you the next step. Do my last back through to get me back to having the whole U wrapped. And I'll show you that one second. I just got to push down these out of my way. And then we'll be working on the scarf parts, which are fairly simple to do. I was surprised how simple. Okay, so we pushed them all down, and as you can see, because I still have to go back to this peg over here and gotta do the last wrap, but you can see what it created underneath. It created the pocket to the hat. And yes, there's big holes there, but you can try to sew them together, or you can take some ribbon and weave them in there, like I did on this hat. Or it also depends on the gauge of your loom, how big the gaps actually are. As you can tell on this one, using 2 strands, they weren't as, as predominant as they are working on this loom. So it does depend on the gauge of your loom. It does depend on the yarn you're using. So you won't really know until you do part of it. So you can pretty much pick a yarn, do it on loom that you want, and then go from there. Like, you can do like a little sample of the pocket part and gauge it. If it doesn't look right, you can start it over. The other thing is too is, yes, I believe I used the yellow straight loom for my hat, and I was able to use all the pegs. However, if your head is smaller or something, you can even take the big long blue loom and just only wrap the amount of pegs that you think that you're going to need. So that's just a little heads up. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to wrap back to the beginning part, and then we'll show you how we do these scarf parts. Now the scarves, I want to say, is going to be a little bit up to you. It's up to you how wide you want them to be, and it's up to you how long you want them to be. I'm only 5'2", and the picture I have on my Facebook channel showed them going down to almost my waist. I would also recommend using a softer yarn, because the scarf parts are going to be around your neck, so you might not want anything like this stuff. I don't quite care for it for me personally. If I were to do another one for me, I would probably use a softer like a lion homespun or something like that, something that's softer to have against my neck. And that will change how the scarf actually is. So once I get this last thing wrapped, which I'm just working on the last knit over, I'll show you how we do the process of the scarf. You're going to be keeping all loops on the peg, or all loops on the pegs while you're doing the scarves on both sides. You don't have to worry about taking, you should not have to worry about taking anything off right away, which is kind of nice, because what you're going to do is you're going to work one side of the scarf, finish that side off, cast it off, then go right back on, put a slip knot and work on the other side. So I'll show you that in a second. If you want this, well, let me get this done because I don't want to throw too much information at you at once here. So let's finish up this to get back to the beginning, and then we'll show you what we're going to do. Okay, so what we need to do now, I'm like a couple away here, is we're back to the beginning. Our loom is all wrapped. We've created the pocket we need for the hat part. And that's what worked out pretty well. You don't have to do any extra rows. Pretty much going back and forth on the pegs, and even on the big one, created that pocket that we wanted for the hat part. So the hat part is already done. So this is the hat part. Now you have to figure out your scarf part. Now I want to show you something on the both looms. What we got to do now on this one, as you can see, is you have to divide it because you want this to fit on your head and have one side around. So you need to divide it. And as you see, I did the same thing. You're dividing up the project. Now what's good is you can do this right on the loom so that you're not actually having to deal with taking things off the loom a lot. The other thing you have to keep in mind is how wide do you want the scarf to be. Because I only did knit stitch, that's why this is rolling so much. So if you like that kind of look, you can leave it to do that yourself. Or you can switch and do the garter stitch, which is knitting a row then purling a row and doing that throughout the scarf to create more of a flat panel scarf. The other thing is, if you can notice slightly, I did some decreasing in it. That's the other thing you have to think about is, do you want it to go from wider to be tapered, or do you want it to be really tapered at the beginning and keep it one length through, or one width throughout? So that will be up to you to decide, and a lot of that is just playing around with the idea to figure out how much you want. As I said, this was the scarf loom, and here it is on the head again. So you have to decide like how wide you want these to fall. You may decide you want them skinnier here to help with the tying around your neck. So that's what you have to keep in mind when you're making this, and the idea of how soft you want the yarn to be. So, but the first thing we have to do is create the gap in order to have two sides to work with. So you have your U, and obviously down here they're connected. So all you're going to do to separate this is move this peg over to one of the ones on the side and knit over. That's going to help create our gap. Now, what you have to decide here in order to make it look decent, so you put that on the other peg. It does not matter which side. You're just removing it and moving it over. Keep in mind it's going to be on the back of your head, lower back of your head. No one's going to really see pretty much how perfect it is. So that's why I liked that. Now I do that. Now what that creates is a way that you can work on one side and then the other side to create the two scarves you need. This is where if you have a row counter, similar to like what I have, you can keep track of how many rows you decided to do on each side. I honestly can't tell you how many rows were here. I know I had over 100 and some rows. It all depends, again, how long you want it to fall on you. So your best bet is to keep track of your rows so that you can make sure they're both even, unless you want one side to be shorter or longer than the other. So make sure you have a counter of some sort. So what you need to do, too, while you have it like this, you need to figure out how wide you want your scarf to be. If you want to keep it the width that it is, then you're just going to simply go back and forth and knit. If you decide that you want to decrease it to create a more tapered effect, then what you're going to do is simply move the pegs over now. Creates a little bit of a better look. As you can see on this one, I was doing it and then I decided at the last minute to move another one over. That's why I kind of had that little gap. So your best bet, excuse me, well actually I think, no, okay, so you have your pocket and now you're going to figure out the scarf. Now the other option you can do is before you move this peg over, what you can actually do is go around the loom a couple more times, back and forth. I mean, that'd be a way, what I mean is, we've already made the pocket, and then what you can do is, if you notice, it kind of ended there, is sometimes I went back and forth before I made the two spots. But that's up to you. I mean, it won't pretty much affect the head as long as the pouch part is big enough for your head. Your scarf is going to go around, help protect the areas that are exposed. So if you want it more narrow, then all you're going to do is take a loop off and move it to the next peg. I should say, take a loop off, move it to the next peg, knit over. take that and move it over. So figure out how wide you want it to be. That's what's going to be tricky. So I'm just going to leave it the length it is, the width it is. This is just a sample. But again, figure out how wide you want it. I mean, I would probably suggest maybe a little more taper than what I did. Again, it depends on your yarn. How flexible is the yarn you're working with? The Red Heart, Red Heart has different brands, but the Super Saver one, it wasn't as flexible, so I probably would do a more narrow one for me if I use that same yarn. If I did something like, I think Lion Brand's Homespun, that's softer, so that might be easier to leave a little wider because it's going to give a little more and be a little more flexible. So that's up to you. But so once you figure out how many you want to leave on there, how much decreasing, and it's really hard to say how much you should decrease it. I mean, your best bet is you can just kind of gauge how big the hat is and then say, okay, I want it to be like half the hat, and then maybe move it over that many pegs. That's what you can do. And you can also do decreasing at the front of the hat. As you look, this is the front, this is the back. So it's up to you. Do you want to decrease it from the back, or do you want to decrease it from the front? Or if you want to be equal, if you're going to decrease one from the back, I would decrease one from the front. Just a suggestion. That way it's kind of even, and it will create, because I believe I did that on that one. I did some decreasing in the front and in the back. That's why this loop, if you see, if I hold that out, I did do some decreasing in the front. That's why it's kind of curling. So you may decrease a couple in the front, you may decrease however many you want in the back. That is up to you. So you decreased it as much as you think that you need it. On whatever side, you can just do the front, just do the back, or like I said, even. Now you're just ready to do the scarf. So what you're going to do is you're going to work on the side that already has your working yarn. That way, and you're going to leave all the loops on the pegs that you have them on. Don't worry about it, because when I was doing it, these actually stayed on the other side, even though I was working on this side. So you're basically going to work back and forth on one side and keeping track of how many rows you do. Just going to do a row here. So like I said, you're just wrapping it. Get to the end of the row. You're going to knit over. I kind of knit over to lock it in place. And then go ahead and knit that row over. I mean, you could decide to do a row and then decrease, do a row, then decrease. It really is up to you how you want your scarf to look. I mean, that's what makes it hard to totally do a tutorial on how to make it, because there's so many different ways you can make it. It's how you want it to be. This is just the starting point of how I did it, and then you modify it the way that you want for your own hat. So we did one row over, and like I said, if you decided you wanted to do the garter stitch, then you're going to purl it on the way back. That's all you're going to do, because you already got to the end. You push them down. Okay, and you're just going to simply work your way back to the start again. So that's all you're going to do. And then when you're done with one side, you're going to cast off the side, and then you're going to do your slip knot, reattach it to the other side, and work that side, and then cast it off. So what I'll do is I'll show you how to take it off the loom. We're going to assume you've got it the length that you want. So then when you're ready to take it off the one side, I'll find a crochet. Oh, that's that big crochet hook in here. Well, it's the only one I have in here, so I'll have to use that one in here, I guess. Okay. So when you're ready to take it off the one side, you've already gotten whatever side you worked on first the way you want, then you're just going to take it off. You can decide to do loops in between. You can decide you don't want to, that you want it to be a little tighter. And then all you're going to do is like what I usually do on my looms, is just take off the loop, put it on, decide whether or not you want a loop in between. So we'll throw one in between. And again, this is after you made it the length that you want. So it's going to be a little interesting to work with, because you're going to have this great big, space here that's filled up with, like as if this was back on there. You're going to have this filled up, and then you're going to have, excuse me, this part still way up here, if you can get what I'm saying. So, but you can kind of fold it a little bit so you can still work on it. But that's all you're going to do, is you're going to just kind of take it off as if you would a normal flat loom, where I'm just putting one chain in between. It'll be up to you whether you want one or two. So I do one little chain, and then I go and I pick up the loop on the peg next to it. So they're both on there, and then I'm going to knit that over that one. Okay, I do have scissors in here. And then I'm going to do my chain. Okay, and then I'm going to grab the next peg. And like I said, this is after you get the length that you want. I like working on the loom as much as I can, just because it makes it a little easier if I don't have to do a whole bunch of steps and then try to piece it together. So I really do try to think of the most simplest way. So all I'm doing is doing my chain in between. So you wrap it around, pull it through, and then grab the peg next to it, the loop next to it, sorry. So that they're both on there, one to the back. And that's all I'm doing all the way across. I'm going to do that till I get to the end. And like I said, you'll want scissors, your crochet hook. The size of the crochet hook will depend on the yarn you're using. But sometimes, even though it requires a bigger crochet hook, this usually is one I tend to favor. I don't know if other people do that. And I'm sorry for being off camera right now. It's just they're fighting me coming off the peg. So, okay, we're almost to the end. Get that over there. Had a little straggler. So I'm just doing my chains in between. And like I said, this will be up to you. If you want the chains in between, how many. Then your best bet is on the loom that you're using. If you're kind of like, well, I don't know how many chains, or if I want them, do a little swatch up and do different chains in between. And then when you do the actual project of the hooded thing, make sure you're using the same loom that you're going to make the hat on to do your swatches first of what stitches you might want to use or anything like that. Because that way it'll make it easier if you already know, well, I like the look of one chain, I like the look of two, I like the look of three, I don't want any chains. I mean, do a little swatch up of taking it off, excuse me, so that you can see how it will look for you. Get over here. Things like to fight me tonight. It's been a while since I made videos. I guess I get out of the loop. Okay. Alright, we're almost to the last one. Okay, we got the last chain we're going to do in the last loop. So what you can do is you can cut your working yarn, giving yourself a little bit of a tail. And then you're going to do the last chain if you decide to do one. Okay, pick up that last loop, do the chain over, and now what you're going to do is take that working yarn tail that you have and work it through that last loop to lock it in place. And then just give it a little pull. Sometimes what I like to do is I like to put a little knot in it just because I'm always afraid it's going to come out. So you may decide, okay, I'm just going to do a little, okay, that's not working right. I tell you, things do not like me today. Okay, so I mean, I'll do a little knot in the end just to kind of extra secure it in place. So that side would be done. You'd have it the length you want. You can hide this yarn into your stitches, or you can trim it, and that would be the one side. See how it moves? That's the one side that you already have done for your pocket, and that's the part of the hat. Now you're going to turn around and you're like, okay, I want to work on the other side. Now keep in mind, it's the same idea. All we're going to do is create our slip knot, and then you're just going to place it right back on the loom. And it doesn't really matter what side you start on, so I'm just going to put it at the front, loosen it, and then you're just going to work this side. And you're going to do the same thing you did on the other. You're going to do the same amount of rows that you chose to do on the other side, or change it up if you want, if you don't want both sides the same. So that's all you're going to do is you're going to work it back on there, wrapping it like that, and then you're just going to knit it over. And that's going to lock your new yarn back onto this project, and you're free to go to keep knitting on this side and get it the length you want for this side of the scarf, and then to take it off whichever way you choose. Fill in the gaps of the hat if you need to, and your hat will be all done. So see, we're locking them into place, means that that has become part of that side. And when you're ready, once you get the length that you want, you're just going to cast it off like we did this side. And what's good about the way you do it, and if you look at this hat in particular, you cannot really see, if you look, which side, when you're looking at it, was the side that I had to add these working yarn back to. So that's what's kind of cool. So that's all you're going to do the hooded scarf. Hopefully I answered any questions you have. Like I said, you have free range to do whatever you want. That's just how I did it. And like I said, you will have these open holes that you can, if depending on the yarn again. So you can hide them with some ribbon or extra yarn like I did in this one if you want a little design. The other thing you might want to do, is what I noticed on this one. What you could do, just as an idea, I'm going to have to put this on to show you. Okay, say you have it on your head. What I might want to do, and I know I look silly, is where they are, you might want to put something in to make it easier to maybe tie it if you want it to be a little closer to your neck or something. I hope this is something people still like. I got a bun in the back, so that's why it's kind of sticking up more. But like I said, you choose how you want it, and then it's all done. I hope you enjoy it.